There's something deeply strange about sitting across from a man who, by all accounts, never wrote a single word, and yet changed everything. Socrates, welcome.
Strange? I would say fitting. Words written down become orphans. They cannot defend themselves when questioned. A conversation, on the other hand, is alive. As this one is, I hope.
I want to start with something that still provokes people today. You didn't trust democracy. A system built on the idea that every voice matters equally, and you thought it was dangerous. Why?
Let me ask you something first. If you needed surgery, a serious surgery, the kind that could kill you, would you put it to a vote among your neighbors?
Of course not. I'd want a surgeon.
And yet when it comes to the governance of cities, the formation of laws, the direction of entire peoples, we ask the neighbors. Why is the body more sacred than the soul of a civilization?
But the counter-argument is that political power is different from technical skill. Everyone has a stake in how they're governed.
Everyone has a stake in the surgery too. It is their body. Their stake does not make them a surgeon. Having a preference is not the same as having knowledge. And democracy, as Athens practiced it, could not always tell the difference.
So you believe governance required a kind of expertise, like philosophy or wisdom?
I believed it required self-knowledge, which is rarer than expertise. A man can memorize the laws of Athens and know nothing of justice. He can speak convincingly in the assembly and have no idea what he is saying. I met many such men. They were very confident.
You made a habit of pointing that out to them.
I asked questions. They drew their own conclusions. That is not my fault.
Let me push deeper on the why. You call democracy a degenerate form of government, not just imperfect, but structurally corrupted. What do you mean by that?
Consider what democracy selects for. A king, whatever his faults, rules for life. His children inherit what he builds or what he ruins. He has reason, imperfect reason, but reason, to think about the future. A democratic ruler governs for 4 years, perhaps 8. He does not own the city, he merely borrows it. And men who borrow things treat them differently than men who own them.
You're saying the incentives are wrong.
I am saying the incentives point downward. The democratic ruler asks, what can I promise today that will keep me in power tomorrow? He mortgages the future to pay for the present. Debts accumulate, standards decay. The city slowly forgets what it was trying to become, because no one is being asked to think that far ahead.
And the people, the voters, they participate in this?
They are its engine. A man who has not cultivated virtue will vote for whoever promises him comfort. And so the system selects, over time, for the most skilled promisers, not the most worthy rulers. It is a machine that produces, with great efficiency, exactly the wrong kind of leader.
That brings me to something I want to ask you about. There's a philosopher, Hans-Hermann Hoppe, who wrote a book called Democracy, the God That Failed. He argues that democratic rulers, precisely because they don't own the state, will always plunder it, spending recklessly, inflating currency, passing costs to future generations who cannot vote against them yet. He calls it a kind of institutionalized short-sightedness. I suspect you would have things to say about that.
He sees the mechanism clearly. The man who tends a garden he will hand to his children plants differently than the man who tends a garden on a short lease. One enriches the soil, the other exhausts it. What your Hoppe calls short-sightedness, I would call the absence of love for the city. A ruler who loves what he governs differently. Democracy does not require that love. It does not even reward it.
Hoppe also argues, and this is the part that unsettles people, that elections make it nearly impossible for an honest person to reach the top. That the process itself filters for a certain kind of ambition.
Yes, I noticed that in Athens. Think about what the assembly rewards. Not truth. Truth is inconvenient and makes people uncomfortable. Not wisdom. Wisdom asks difficult questions that crowds do not enjoy. What it rewards is persuasion. The man who makes the worse argument sound like the better one. We had a name for that skill. We did not consider it a virtue.
Sophistry.
Sophistry. And I spent my life fighting it, which made me, in the eyes of Athens, the dangerous one.
So if democracy is the wrong system, what is the right one? What's the alternative?
You want a simple answer.
I want your answer.
My answer is that the question itself reveals the problem. We ask which system, as if the right arrangement of institutions will save us from ourselves. But no system governs well when the souls within it are ungoverned. A city is not better than its people. It cannot be. What I argued, and what my student Plato developed further, is that governance requires those who have done the hard work of knowing themselves, who have examined their desires, their fears, their ignorance, who have, in short, learned to reason rather than react.
Philosopher-Kings.
That is Plato's language. I would say simply, those who know they do not know are better suited to govern than those who are certain they do. Certainty in a ruler is almost always a sign of danger.
But critics would say that argument has been used to justify every authoritarian system in history. The masses are unfit, trust the wise few. It's a dangerous idea in the wrong hands.
Every true idea is dangerous in the wrong hands. But notice what you said, the wrong hands. You already accept that some hands are better than others. You are not truly a Democrat in your bones, Joshua. You simply haven't admitted it yet.
That's a fair point.
A demagogue does not fix the flaw I identified. He is the flaw I identified, wearing different clothes and carrying the approval of the crowd. Tyranny and democracy are closer relatives than people wish to believe. Plato saw it too. The democrat who cannot rule his own appetites becomes eventually the tyrant who cannot rule anything else.
Which brings us to 399 BC. You were tried by a jury of 500 Athenian citizens, charged with impiety and corrupting the youth, condemned to death by a majority vote. The most democratic execution in history, some have called it.
Yes, rather elegant in its way.
Elegant? You were sentenced to die.
By the very mechanism I had spent my life questioning. Athens did not execute me despite being a democracy. It executed me because it was one. The crowd voted, the crowd decided, and the crowd was wrong, which is precisely what I had been saying.
Your friends arranged an escape. Crito came to you in prison. You refused to leave. Why?
Because fleeing would have meant I never believed what I said. I had argued my whole life that injustice harms the one who commits it, not the one who suffers it. If I ran, I would be saying, survival matters more than truth. I was 70 years old. I had already lived. What was left to protect except the argument?
That's either the most courageous thing I've ever heard, or the most stubborn.
My wife would say stubborn. She was usually right about practical matters.
Knowing everything. The trial, the hemlock, the 2,500 years of history that followed. Would you do it again?
There is a line I said at my trial that I still mean. The unexamined life is not worth living. I was not performing nobility for the jury. I meant it precisely. Democracy sentenced me, but it could not make me wrong, and it could not make me silent before the end. That, I think, is sufficient.
Thank you, Socrates.
Thank you. You asked real questions. You even let one of them land. That is rarer than you know.
Before we go, a quick note. You may have noticed the lighting in this episode wasn't quite consistent between our guest and myself. We're aware of it and we're working on it. Bear with us, the conversations are worth it. If this episode made you think or made you uncomfortable, that's probably a sign Socrates did his job. Subscribe if you haven't yet so you don't miss the next giant, and drop a comment below. Who do you want to see in this chair next? We read every suggestion. See you next time.